Today, I'm talking about one of my favorite shows, I May Destroy You, and how some of the music predicts, hints at, maybe even influences the ending. I do want to warn that this video has spoilers about the show, so keep that in mind, and if you haven't seen it, you should be watching that instead, for sure. It's a show that centers on a young woman, Arabella's sexual assault in her life, friendships, and psychological state after the assault. But it's also a vast exploration of victimhood and consent in their many nebulous forms, an ode to the gray areas of life and relationships and gender. And it's also, in many ways, a show about process, the fantasy of closure for people who have experienced trauma, and also about the concept of radical empathy when faced with trauma. So it's not the lightest show in the world, but it's really worthwhile if you can handle it. And it was created and written by Michaela Cole, who's just a mind-blowing artist. So, music. There are two songs in particular that I see as being really important to representing where the show is going to go. In terms of, being in a conversation with the plot. And the music in general for the show is incredible. And I'm sure there are so many deeper connections that I'm missing out on. But these were just the two that really caught my attention. So some context for the first song. There's this trajectory that the main character, Arabella, is on after her assault. Social media activism, vengeance. She learns about doxing and flirts with the idea of doing it. And, it makes sense. She doesn't have the truth or the total memory of everything that happened to her the night of her assault. And so a lot of this is necessitated by a need for truth and for exposure. So she kind of becomes more hardened as the show progresses. You can especially see it in the way that she treats her friends, Kwame in particular. She just kind of forgets that other people are capable of being hurt also, and that everyone is a victim in a way. And there's an intensity and almost a judgment to the way that she relates to everyone around her. And for me, I see episode 10 as a really big change in narrative. It's where a softening or a synthesis of experiences starts to happen. It's transitional, and the first time that we meet the Arabella we see at the end of the series, where she coheres momentarily for the first time. The Universe Wakes Up by The Comet is Coming starts playing while she is in the garden with her roommate Ben and her best friend Terry. And the garden is an important place because it's the place of her eventual peace in the last episode. And so this song kind of starts as an inflection point in the show and in her journey and her understanding of herself. She's about to find out that her best friend hasn't been totally honest about the night of her assault, and she's also about to confront a lot of suppressed memories about her family, like her dad's infidelity and her responsibility in her dad's home being robbed. The song, which I'll link below, starts with this really peaceful chord, and it's really just a moment of peace, which also hints at the eventual moment of peace that she will have in the garden. And then slowly notes are added into this chord, and out of that, this searching, beautiful jazz solo comes, and it sounds like her impending discoveries and growth. It mirrors the mental attitudes and change that she's about to go through. And I really think of this moment as a huge transition in the show, in her life, in her process. In the same episode, there's an absolutely beautiful moment where Kwame asks for and receives a hug from a man. The Egg by Epic Mountain starts playing during this hug, And just as beautiful to me is the moment right after, where Arabella is waiting for her best friend Terry in a chair after a day of revelations about her family and also about Terry from a mutual friend. She has this big smile on her face and she is cupping the top of her head gently. And it's kind of mirroring Kwame's hug. There's something about that transition that's so beautiful to me. She's about to absolve Terry of any guilt she may be feeling for Arabella's sexual assault. It's one of the most stunning scenes of media I've ever seen. You know, it's kind of been building up. You're waiting for this confrontation between these two friends, and instead there's just gentleness. I mean, cognitively, we know that there's only ever one person to blame for a sexual assault, and that's the perpetrator. But we've also seen Arabella on this trajectory of, you know, being really quick to take down people for anything they've done wrong. And so it's a total 180 from that Arabella who's taking down people even who are closest to her, like Kwame, and who almost seems to enjoy it. Or, you know, certainly takes power from that kind of thing. Which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just very different from where she ends up. And this moment kind of shows the immediate growth that she's had in an episode where she's learned about her own complicity in hurting others. And so her imperfections are newly apparent to her, and she's full of gratitude for Terry, who, you know, they've been best friends since high school. She's been there through it all. So Arabella just radiates with vulnerability and self-love, and she looks enlightened. The Egg by Epic Mountain, for me, in my opinion, is the perfect song and song title for the gestures of love that Kwame and Arabella allow themselves, and the perfect song for the continuation and renewal of Arabella and Terry's friendship. I mean, even the concept of the egg, you know, what comes from eggs, growth, birth, rebirth. And speaking of birth, one of the things that Terry and Arabella say to each other constantly throughout the show is, your birth is my birth, your death is my death. And they say it so much that it, you know, is a refrain. It's something we expect, but in this context of absolution, it's heartbreaking. It's one of the most unique and wonderful female friendships I've ever seen. There is no chicken before the egg or egg before the chicken. Neither exist without the other. I was looking into this song by Epic Mountain, The Egg, and I was surprised to find that it's the music and a kurzgesagt animation of the short story by Andy Weir. In the story, a man dies after a fatal accident and is told by a godlike figure that the entire universe is an egg made for the purpose of maturing him, and that he is, in fact, everyone who has ever lived. It's a story about the interconnectedness of humans, and one that really inspires radical empathy after reading. A pivotal sentence in that story to me is, once you've lived every human life throughout all time, you will have grown enough to be born. That sentence could also be the thesis of the show. It certainly fits how nuanced the characters are. You know, you really get to know them, you spend time with them, you almost become them, and you see how difficult it is to be a fully good or fully bad person because there's so much conflict and tension in all of our desires and needs. It's also a sentence that really applies to Arabella's process in the last episode, which was really groundbreaking in what it encompassed. It's this kind of like meta imagining of all the scenarios that could potentially give her closure. She first destroys her rapist physically, which reverses their roles as victim and perpetrator, which, you know, may really be necessary in someone's thought process to move on. She then destroys those roles with empathy, literally killing him with kindness. She then destroys the boundaries that separate them as humans, which are the boundaries of gender. Those dissolve when she penetrates him consensually, again, switching places. All of these scenarios require confronting and meeting her rapists, which is such a heavy thing to imagine. It's really crazy that someone could write these things, and you just hope that it's completely cathartic and not triggering or re-traumatizing. But the only scenario in which she does not meet the rapist is the last one, which is the one that we all hope is real. It's really unclear what is real and what's not real. But it's she decides to stay in the garden with her roommate Ben, watching Kurzgesagt videos, and I may destroy you. May being a permissive word. It reminds me of East of Eden, the Tim Shell moment. For Arabella, the only way to move on is to decide that she's allowed to. And a retelling of The Egg by her might have the sentence, once she's lived every iteration of her and her rapists, once she's lived her experience as him, she has grown enough to be born again.